Hi there and welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about 5 benefits of returning again and again to a familiar location to test new equipment or to try new photographic techniques. I will also be introducing you to one of my favorite places. If you're new here, my name is John Pattison. I am a photographer, a writer, and a neighborhood advocate in Oregon's Willamette Valley. And on this channel, we explore how creative practice can slow us down, make us more attentive to the world around us, and even lead to personal and community transformation. And if those topics are topics that you love too, consider subscribing. So something that I have learned over the years is that it is really helpful for me to have 1 or 2 places that I know well that I can return to run a new piece of camera kit through its paces, to learn my equipment, and to develop new photographic skills. One of those places for me is Mount Angel Abbey and Seminary, a Benedictine abbey that dates back to 1882 and that sits atop a hill about 5 miles from my house. And as I look back on my photographic journey, there have been so many times that I have made the short drive, or sometimes even the short bike ride to Mount Angel Abbey. When I got my first film camera, which was a Nikon FE2, I took it to Mount Angel. When I got my first super telephoto zoom lens, one of the Sigmas, I took it to the woods at the Abbey. I took the drone. I also tried, very unsuccessfully, to do astrophotography there. There were a couple of weeks where I was spending a lot of time practicing shooting from ground level. I went to the Abbey to do that. And when I started a daily photography practice, I spent day 1 at the Abbey. More recently, I went to the Abbey with this setup. This is the Nikon ZF and the 40mm f2 lens. I also brought this small lens, which is the 28mm f2.8. When I was there, I took some GoPro, some POV footage with the GoPro. You'll see it's a technique I definitely need to work on, but I think can be kind of fun when I figure it out. And then I offered up 5 benefits of trying new gear, new cameras, new lenses, as well as new techniques at a location that you know well. I was not able to film the conclusion of the video there because we had a rare thunderstorm that rolled in. So after I go through the 5 benefits of returning to a familiar location to learn new gear and techniques, we'll actually return here to the office for a few concluding thoughts on how to choose a location that will work great for you. And if you stay until the very, very end, you will hear a bonus 6th benefit of returning to a familiar place that's close to home. But for now, let's head over to the Abbey. There are monks coming, so I'm going to do this fast. I want to talk about the first benefit real quick and just kind of get it out of the way. And that is that there's always a benefit to going back to a location again and again. Whether you're bringing old gear or new, you're going to see how that location changes from one time of day to the next, from one season to the next, and even from 1 year to the next, and kind of seeing how those changes are happening over longer periods of time. You're going to understand what the light does. I remember going on a street photography walk with my brother Dustin. He's a street photographer in Portland, and he makes the same walk in downtown Portland every single Saturday. And he knew what the light was going to do, how it was going to bounce off one building and kind of illuminate another side of the street. And he was there for it. And over time, he learned this over time by going back again and again. And then he learned to use that to his advantage as a photographer. You're also going to learn how to make more thoughtful compositions over time. You're going to see new details. And something I think is really cool is that over time, you're actually going to be able to observe your own growth as a photographer. So whether you have new gear or not, go back to those locations again and again, discover new things, and track your progress over time. Right, so the second benefit of bringing a new piece of equipment to a familiar location is that for once you get to focus more on the gear. In a typical situation, you don't want to be thinking too much about your camera, about whether or not you know how to use all the dials and whether or not the buttons are assigned the way that you want them, or whether or not you even like the special feature that comes with the camera that maybe you were interested in the first place. At that point, in the moment, you want it to be second nature. You want to be able to grab your camera, pick out the right lens, and be able to focus on, getting the right composition that you want or capturing the moment, something that's developing rapidly. But when you get a new piece of equipment, everybody has a learning curve. There's a learning curve for this, and so we all have to be gearheads to a certain extent when we get a new piece of equipment. And when you come to a familiar location, a place that you know well, a place where maybe you have favorite subjects that you always like to capture, a place where you know what the light's going to do at a certain time of day, we get to focus more on the gear, and that's important. Even folks who aren't gearheads, folks who pride themselves on not being gearheads, we all kind of have to be when you get that new piece of equipment and we're out there like focusing in on that new camera and new lens. You can tell I've been eating a lot of those berries. All right, so with that, the third benefit of bringing new equipment to a location that you know well is that over time, you get to compare the results and experience. Over the course of the last several years, I have brought so many new cameras to Mount Angel that I can now compare the results and the experience from one type of camera to the next. When I got my Ricoh GR3X, I brought it here. When I got my first film camera, I brought it here. When I got the Nikon ZFC, which is the crop sensor predecessor of this camera, I brought it here. When I got my first full frame camera, I actually brought it to a church at the bottom of the hill. It was the very first place that I went. When I got my drone, I brought it here to a parking lot that's kind of just out of frame to see what the Abbey looked like from the air. And so now over time, I've been able to compare what are the results that I get. What does a particular subject, particular statue look like when I shoot it with the Nikon ZF versus when I shot it with the film camera. So that's really beneficial. It's not necessarily scientific, but it accumulates over time. And I think that can be really helpful. All right, so the fourth benefit is that bringing a new piece of equipment, let's say a new camera or a new lens, to a familiar location is that it gives you the opportunity to see the familiar with fresh eyes. The most dramatic example of that for me was when I got the drone and I brought it here to the Abbey and I put it up in the air and I could see what the Abbey looked like from above. I could fly it over Mount Angel, the town, and see what Mount Angel looked like from above. Only slightly less dramatic was when I got my first macro lens and I was able to really zoom in on the smallest details and complexities in nature and to see that beauty and appreciate that really for the first time, because what I was seeing had been largely invisible to the naked eye. But it doesn't have to be that dramatic. So even here on the Nikon ZF, this has a switch where with just a simple flick, you can move it to black and white mode. And what it does is that it pulls up the last black and white picture profile that you used. And I've had a lot of fun today moving it over to black and white and seeing the Abbey in black and white. This is especially nice on a day when there's we've got bad light, it's very contrasty. Well, I can take advantage of that so-called bad light. You actually use it to my advantage, shoot in black and white, really lean into that contrast, think it more about shapes than about colors. And it's been a lot of fun. I don't know, it's one of my favorite new features of this camera. To be honest, it's a little thing, but I'm having just so much fun with it. And so, yeah, I'm seeing the Abbey in black and white today, which is kind of cool. It's very cool. So yeah, that's the fourth benefit, seeing the familiar with fresh eyes. Well, I did just hear a roll of thunder, and so we may be getting some thunderstorms after all, and so I'm going to go ahead and get this fifth benefit in while I can, and that is that it can enhance your creativity. It gives you a chance to discover in a pressure-free environment, pressure-free because you know if this location's not going anywhere, you can come back again and again. You can discover in a pressure-free environment whether or not this new piece of gear opens up any new creative possibilities. I mentioned macro photography. That's been a big one for me. More recently, it's been multiple exposure photography. I haven't done this yet on the ZF, but I know it has the same feature. I've been using it on my GR, where you can take a shot and then you can overlay your new composition on that first shot. So you can kind of see how it's going to line up. The ZF offers something very, very similar. I've been having a lot of fun with multiple exposure photography, even though I'm definitely not very good at it. But I've been inspired by this one particular photographer who I follow on Twitter. I can't remember her name. I'll link to her stuff down below, but the work that she's doing is just incredible. So anyway, yeah, so you can bring that out into the field to this familiar location and just play around. You can just play around. Maybe that's the way to summarize a lot of this. Yes, it's some learning. You're learning this new gear, but it gives you the freedom, the space to just play around and see what's possible. And that's really valuable for us as photographers, both to improve as photographers and just to not lose touch with why we started doing this in the first place, that it's just so much fun. Well, I hope that was interesting or helpful. It might be obvious from the photos and the footage why I love going back to the Abbey. And in fact, I want to spend just a couple minutes on that, on just some considerations on how to choose a place of your own that you can go back to again and again. And I came up with 4 considerations. The first is proximity. Ideally, the location would be close to home. Of course, close is relative. I'm fortunate because the Abbey is so close that I can literally see it from my front yard. My other regular destination, though, is Oregon's Central Coast, which is about 90 minutes away. And so while a trip to the Abbey can be just a couple hours, I can make a last-minute decision to go there. The coast is much more of a commitment. It's usually a day trip that requires some planning and some coordinating with the family for me to be gone all day. And that leads me to my second consideration when identifying a place to return to, and that is accessibility. The location should be accessible most of the year and at most different times of the day. That way you have a lot of options in terms of when you can go there, the things that you can test out. And that's actually the one thing about the Central Coast, is that occasionally the roads through the coastal range to get there are too snowy or icy to drive safely. The third consideration is that the location should be interesting. One of the things that I like about the Abbey is that it's so visually fascinating, so visually interesting. There are cool brick buildings to photograph. There's a gorgeous sanctuary, that amazing organ. There are statues and flowers and trees and birds. There's wildlife. There are people. From one side of the hill, you can see distant mountains. and much more. There's almost no kind of photography that you can't practice there. And something else I find interesting is just the paradox, or maybe juxtaposition is the right word, of trying new things in a setting that seems steeped in timelessness. It's true that Mount Angel Abbey, I keep pointing that direction because that's the direction of the Abbey from my house. It's true that it dates back just to 1882, but they're part of a Benedictine tradition that goes back to the 5th and 6th centuries. And I like that long after me, the monks at Mount Angel will be continuing their life of work and prayer. So I just like that paradox of testing out equipment in a place that already feels so ancient. The fourth and final consideration may or may not be surprising to you, and that is love. If possible, pick a place that you love. I love the Abbey. I've been visiting the Abbey at least monthly for nearly 20 years. Long before we lived in this town, I was actually traveling from Portland about, once every 3 weeks or so. And it was actually on a Christmas Eve, I took a wrong turn out of the Abbey that I drove into the town where we are. Like I found it by accident. My wife and I had been looking for a town to settle. And I knew pretty much immediately when I drove through what is now our town, that this was going to be where we stayed. I brought Kate the next day, and she knew even quicker. And so I will always be indebted to the Abbey for that, bringing us to this town that we love so much. I also love the library at the Abbey. I love the bookstore there. They have an amazing brewery, and I'm getting to know a couple of the monks there. In fact, I'm actually an oblate novice at the Abbey, which means that I have attached myself somewhat as a layperson to the life of the Abbey. In one of my books, I even describe Mount Angel Abbey as my querencia. I know that I'm mispronouncing that word. It's a Spanish word that means a place of belonging and safety. And in a bullfight, it refers to the place in the ring that a bull retreats to gather strength for the next charge. And for nearly 2 decades, that's what Mount Angel has been for me. It's been a place of belonging and safety, a place that I can retreat to from time to time, whether it's for a few hours or for a whole day or sometimes multiple days, as I get ready for sort of the next charge into life. I actually love the Abbey so much that I hope someday to do a serious photography project there, something that I can give back to the Abbey as a gift. And I'm still working on some ideas, but I know that having photographed it dozens of times in a much more casual way will eventually help me when I tackle that serious project. All right, and so I would love to know, what is a location that you return to again and again to test out new camera gear or to simply practice becoming a better photographer? Let me and the rest of the community know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you haven't yet, consider liking this video, consider subscribing. Thank you for watching, and many blessings. Bye. The number one benefit for shooting close to home, meeting up with your wife for a beer after. Cheers.